Alright, here commences my first ever attempt to make a YouTube video game video. I am playing Democracy 3, and... ooh, oh, you can see my mouse cursor. Alright, I'm going to try not to move my mouse cursor around like a rabid squirrel, but I apologize in advance if I am unable to curb that habit. Democracy 3, the political simulator of choice for rabid squirrels. It is a actually fairly complex political simulator. I'm a huge fan of strategy games and city builders and those sorts of things, so I thought this was really cool, and I picked it up pretty much as soon as it came out. It aims to model the real-world voting patterns of actual people in actual countries. So they've taken 6 real-world countries and tried to simulate them. Not only the habits of the voters, but also the situations, economic realities, environmental situations in those countries. And the idea is to use political tools that are available to real-world political leaders, like setting the tax rate, passing different laws, changing policies, those sorts of things, and see if you can do a better job at running the country than the people who are currently doing it. And let's find out if we can. You get to play as one of 6 modern countries. You have the United Kingdom, France, Germany, the United States, Canada, and Australia. I myself am Canadian, and I've tried playing as Canada a couple of times, and every time I play as Canada, it ends in utter and crushing financial disaster. And I don't know what that says about me or about Canada, but that's what happens. And in my defense, I've played the United Kingdom and France very successfully. I did very well. I had a huge budget surplus. Everybody was really happy. I got rid of crime. Everything was great. But it just didn't work out in Canada. So it must be Canada. You got some basic statistics in the country selection window. It's just, I think, supposed to be funny mostly. I mean, they have here maple syrup consumption is apparently 0.26 kilograms per person. I mean, presumably that's per year. Although it doesn't say, so it could be anything. It could be per day. You don't know. So I'm going to try playing as the United States. I tried once before, and in my first term, I thought I solved it. I solved the budget deficit by cutting the military budget in half. Because they were spending an awful lot of money on the military. And so when I cut out all that money, I had all sorts of extra money to do things like institute educational reform and universal health care and libraries and maternity leave for everyone and public transit, and I was feeling very pleased with the way things were going. But the simulated Americans were not so pleased with me, and unfortunately, I had also slashed the Secret Service budget. So I got shot about halfway through my first term. And one of the amusing things about this game is there's not actually a way to win in the conventional sense. There are just 2 ways to lose. You can lose an election, or you can be shot. And I think somewhere in the handbook, the manual, because I'm one of those people who always reads the manual for every game that I play, it says that all political careers end in failure, which I thought was very poetic. So, basic setup screen. You can name your party anything you want. And I always like to try, let's see, what should I always try and name it something that I find amusing, because, I don't know, maybe they won't shoot me for instituting maternity leave if I'm funny. And I also like to name the opposition party, there's only one opposition party, something unflattering, because it just helps my self-esteem. And the term length and term limit are by default set to the real laws of the country that you chose to play. So 4 years term length, and in the United States, president only gets 2 terms. But I think Mr. President Obama would agree with me that 2 terms is not enough to fix the problems of the United States. So I'm going to select no limit. So as long as I keep getting voted back in, I can stay. Sure, we'll leave hurricanes and earthquakes on, although I've never actually seen those happen, but we'll see. Difficulty, I'm going to leave at the default of 100%. Innate socialism and innate liberalism, I actually think these sliders are massively misleading the way that they're labeled, because what it actually means is that there's a spectrum of socialism up here and capitalism up there, and so 100% is in the middle, but it makes you think like it's 100% socialist, which is not what it means. It means that it's in the middle between socialism and capitalism. Same thing with liberalism. It's the middle in between conservatism and liberalism. And the idea with these sliders is that if you don't want to change the actual difficulty of the game mechanics, you can just change the voting profiles of the country to be more or less in line with your own political agenda to make it easier or harder to get elected. And then, so political apathy, this is set differently based on the country that you choose. And it's funny because when I played Canada, I think it was at 41% and the UK was about 38%. And I thought that was really depressing. And then I played the United States and I thought 58%. It's very grim. That's what we're working with. So, alright, so when you start, your country's situation it'll depend on which country you pick. Some countries, they start out with a pretty solid position, and some countries start out with a lot of problems in the middle of a crisis. So for example, as the US, we have healthcare is crap right now. We have, a big crisis in healthcare. Also, some middling problems with poverty, crime, unemployment. They say that education is doing very well. It's funny because I don't always agree with the game. I wouldn't say that the education system in the United States is doing all that hot, but apparently, according to them, it is quite high. So we'll go with that to take our benefits where we can get them. Because as you can see by all the red icons, there are many things that are not going very well in the United States at this moment. So this is the main game window. This is the main field of play. Somebody was watching me play this game at one point, and they walked over like, "Wow, what a pretty interface. What happens when you click on the circles? Like, do you go to different missions and you go to meetings and talk to people and role play out the different?" No. This is the game. We have icons. The icons represent statistics and policies. You can change the policy sliders. You can see what they do to the statistics. You can look at graphs to see the increase or decrease of your statistics. You can see what people think about your policy changes. And it's all represented through iconography and graphs, and that's the sort of game that it is. I think it's a really fun game, but you just have to be prepared for what you're getting into. There are no cutscenes. There's no voice acting. So the main interface window, the policy icons and statistic icons are divided into these categories, starting on the left-hand side over here and going anti-clockwise. We have law and order, we have public services, we have tax, we have economy, welfare, foreign policy, and transportation. So in these different categories, you have the three different kinds of circles. The blue circles are statistics, and these are things that describe to you the situation in your country. You cannot directly change the statistics. So, like this, for example, is tobacco usage. You cannot directly change tobacco usage, but what you can do is you can change a policy to try and change tobacco usage. So, for example, anything in white is a policy that you can adjust. So looking at tobacco usage, I say, okay, what's increasing tobacco usage? Well, the tobacco tax has an impact. So if I want to change tobacco usage, I have to change the tax and see, you change a policy and you try to move the situation in the direction that you want. And everything in this game is interconnected. So these arrows that go between policies and different statistics, some of them don't have very many connections. Some of them, like GDP, it's just massively interconnected, and it's one of the things that makes the game really interesting. So those are the blue icons. We have statistics like tobacco usage, wages, like how much people are making. This is private school, how many people are going to private school. This is train usage. And then, as I said, the white things represent policies. So science funding is a policy, and the corporate tax level is a policy that I can change. And I can change rail subsidies. So these are all the sorts of things that politicians can actually do, concrete changes that they can put in place to try and affect the problems that are going on. And the problem in the game, just like in real life, is that sometimes you pass a law and you think that it's going to help something, but it has all of these unintended consequences because they can't hover over shit and see where the arrows are going and what's going to happen. So at least I have that advantage. I have the hovering over shit advantage that our poor political leaders don't have. Finally, the red and green icons. So the green icons represent a beneficial situation in your country. In this case, it is technological advantage. So if you see the arrows, the speed of the arrows indicates like the strength of the effect. So the fact that we have a really high level of technology in our country is feeding into the technological advantage. So is the space program and our creationism versus evolution policies, teaching policies. And then that in turn is increasing our GDP and our productivity. So that is good. That is a very good situation. Unfortunately, we only have one good situation, and we have, 8 bad situations. We have homelessness, okay. We have pollution. We have a skills shortage, which seems like a bit of a problem. We have internet crime. And for any of these things, you can click on the icon. You can click on all of these icons and it pulls up these graphs and things, and it explains what the causes are and what the effects are. So in this case, the fact that we have a lot of technology and a lot of crime, lo and behold, you have high-tech criminals and really sexy heist movies about high-tech criminals. The intelligence services are having a negative impact on internet crime. So they're lowering the level of internet crime, but they're just not doing it enough. So then it's having negative effects. Everyone is sad. This everyone bar means the opinion of everybody. Everyone is a little unhappy about the internet crime. It's also decreasing our GDP and increasing overall crime. Our other problems include alcohol abuse, asthma epidemic, drug addiction. What's this one? Antisocial behavior. I'm not sure if that's somebody yelling or vomiting in a public space, but either way, we can't have that. So we'll have to try and fix that. So those are our problems right now. Some of the interface elements that you need to know. Up here in the top left-hand corner, this fist, 26. That's my political capital. It's sort of like mana. It's my political mana. You can only pass legislation that you have enough support for. It's trying to model that concept that you can't pass controversial legislation without drumming up support for it first. So it's a turn-based game, and every turn is a quarter of a year. So you can only do so much per quarter. You also have your income and your expenditure, which gives you either a surplus or a deficit. Currently we have a tiny bit of a surplus, but we have massive debt. It's a huge problem, actually. Thanks, Bush. We also have, this is just a sort of at a glance how much time you have until your next election. This here is, oh yes, the intelligence briefing. This tells you about all of the possible threats to your regime. You see these crusaders of the Lord? They're the people who shot me last time, so I'll be keeping a wary eye on them. And then these are various opinion polls and statistics. You have your financial data, implement new policies. All of the white policies on the screen now are things that are currently in place, so you can repeal those, or you can put new policies into place, and then the other stuff is not as important. And then the last interface element is in the middle of the screen. You have all of the different groups of people that make up your population. And The way that they model voters is actually pretty interesting. So they have these different groups, but people are complicated. Nobody in real life is actually just a socialist or, just an environmentalist. People are complicated. They have different elements of their personality, different groups that they identify with. So you could be, a socialist, commuter, poor farmer. Well, you're a commuting farmer. Own it. I'm gonna go with that. Who's also a patriot, for example. And so those different elements make up your identity. And so you might be really happy as a patriot about my policies, but really hate me as a socialist and as a poor person. And the way that they deal with that is, if you go to the focus groups, you'll see, so this is an example voter in my focus group, and this person belongs to all of these groups, and these influence bars represent how important each of those groups are to their overall opinion. So for example, this person is a patriot, and as a patriot, they like my policies, but being a patriot is not that important to them. It's pretty low. So it's not really doing much for them, They care much more about being an ethnic minority, about being poor, and they're also a liberal trade unionist and environmentalist. So all of those things added together, the fact that I'm making all of those groups pretty unhappy, means 6.10 approval rating. This guy is not voting for me. In fact, he's a member of the Anti-Fun Coalition, and he is aggressively opposed to my regime, and his name is also Barbara Long. So it's a problem for me. I'm in fact not very popular at all. I have a current popularity of 23%. So if the election were to be held tomorrow, I would lose, and it would be terrible. So I have 4 years to try and get this number up a little bit. And the gray bar that's behind each of the groups, that denotes the percentage of the population that belongs to that group. So, roughly half of the people are capitalists, roughly half of the people are socialists, which is about what you would expect from having that socialism, capitalism thing right in the middle. So that's our starting situation. The only other thing that I want to mention that I think could be quite confusing to new people is when you see these arrows, let's see, let me pick a good one. See, when you see these arrows going from one circle to another, it's not always intuitive what they mean. So the border controls, for example, are decreasing tourism, and that's straightforward. It means that it's decreasing the level of tourism. And it's also this red arrow from border controls to the liberals. That doesn't mean that it's decreasing the number of liberals, it just means that it's making the liberals less happy because it's going to the liberal opinion bar. And then if you see, it goes in behind immigration, but you can also see that it is going positively to the patriot bar. So having high border controls is making the patriots happier, but it's making the liberals and the ethnic minorities less happy. And it's also decreasing immigration and decreasing tourism. So that can be a little tricky because in some cases we're talking about decreasing the incidence of a thing, in some cases we're talking about the opinion. And then the other thing that can be really confusing is sometimes whenever you're talking about increasing something or decreasing it, it's always talking about the numerical value. It's not necessarily a good thing. So for example, when I'm looking at GDP, something that is crime is decreasing GDP, that's bad. That's pretty intuitive. And the skills shortage is decreasing our GDP, and the global economy is sort of bumping it up a little. That's intuitive and that makes sense. But then what gets tricky is when you're looking at something like crime. What is this? No, this is handgun laws. I want crime. So here, when you have things that are red under the causes for crime, that's actually good. So education is decreasing crime. It's lowering the level of crime. The death penalty... see, I disagree with this completely. I don't think that the death penalty actually decreases crime. But anyways, I will worry about arguing with the makers of this game later. So it's just important to keep that in mind, that when you see that something is having a negative level or a negative effect, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an undesirable one. They're just numerical values. And so that's an overview of the game menus, and let's get started on our first turn.